Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the legal and governmental correspondent. Today, my guest is an award-winning author, and Michael Conley. And your book that we're here to talk about today is Lethal Trajectories. And while your first initials are, you go by Mike, is that right?
That's right.
All right,
Thank
so
you.
if I can, I'll call you Mike. And we first met, you made a presentation at Rotary.
Yes, sir.
And I was kind of fascinated by that. So your book, Lethal Trajectories, is a fictionalized version of what the future could be based on current forces currently in play. Is that right?
That's correct, Jamie. Yep.
All right. And so your book, which we'll get into and what it's about and the themes, but first I want to give some background. You are the founder and CEO of Weathering the Storm, LLC, and you also serve as the chairman and CEO of the Conley Family Foundation.
That's correct.
And you are a former business executive, pilot, author, and lecturer, and you've written and spoken frequently on the topics covered in this presentation. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, you graduated from the University of Minnesota.
I did.
And you currently reside in the Twin City area?
I
then?
do.
All right. And after serving in the Navy, and you later completed a graduate business program at Stanford. So that's your educational background.
That's in the School of Hard Knocks, too.
All right. Well, this topic is, well, you're the author of this book, and then there's also the guide for weathering the storm. And there's actually a website that is www.weatheringthestorm.net.
That's correct.
And so folks can check out that website after they're viewing our segment here today. So now you are a business executive, pilot, have had lots of life experiences. Why did you write this book, and what is it about?
Well, Jamie, maybe I can give a little background.
Yes.
I got into this whole area, the perfect storm as they call it, right around the turn of the century. I started looking at energy as an investment and found out, whoa, we got some issues here to deal with. And I thought, well, let's do what the Germans did. We have problems with oil, we'll just take the coal and turn it into oil and all will be well. And boom, I started running into the carbon footprint issue.
Okay.
And then I looked at, well, we've got the economic muscle and technology to do everything, because we all think technology is a panacea, it'll get us out of the mess. And I thought, ooh, not so fast, Mike. We've got issues here. And then I looked at the last part of what I would call the 4E equation, and that's expectations. And you and I grew up under the American dream. Cheap energy, abundant resources, unlimited opportunities, and I started to think, what happens when the dream enablers start to disappear? Thus, the perfect storm.
Okay.
And I found the best way to learn about something is to teach it or write about it. And so for the last 14 years, I've dedicated a good deal of my time doing that. And as I was giving these PowerPoint presentations and all that and seeing that dazed look on people's eyes, I thought, you know, I remember in college, Ayn Rand, George Orwell, people like that, they wrote a fiction book to get across their point. And so that's what I did here.
Okay.
But it's a little different. It's a hybrid book in that I have the book itself that tells the story based on the trajectories we're finding. And it's got about 35 pages of footnotes in the back.
Okay.
So it's documented. If you're reading something I said, you can go to the back, like for instance, the new Cold War, the oil situation, whatever, and it's there.
Yeah, and that's when I've purchased your book. I have not read it yet. So unlike some people who interview people who write books, they talk about having read the book, maybe even if they didn't read it. But I'm going to be honest, I didn't read it yet, although I have been to your website, fascinated by the website, and the fact you keep updating the website. Is that correct? Yes, sir,
I do.
So, but I noticed that, yes, starting at page 449, and there's research notes. And so all of these different things have background, like the East China Sea and weaponry and so forth. So is your book, it's obviously about the future, is it set in any particular year?
It is, the year 2017.
Okay.
And I picked that year so I could get beyond whoever the next administration is. Of course, it's Obama. This was written right before the last election.
Yeah, by the way, yeah, your book was published, it says copyright in 2011.
Right. And it really came out toward the end of the year, so it was really 2012. It really hit the streets, if you will.
Okay, but it took you a couple years to write, I assume?
Oh yeah, it did. It took about 2 years from start to
So
end.
you started it shortly after that 2008 election? Then?
I started about 2010. That's when
Okay.
I hit on the idea that, I need something that'll get this story across a little better.
Okay.
But then I didn't want to leave folks high and dry like, oh my God, gloom and doom and everything, because there's plenty of opportunities in this thing if we do it right. I think it was Churchill that says a pessimist finds difficulty in every opportunity and an optimist finds opportunity in every difficulty.
Right.
And so I believe that end of it is there. And as you know from the Rotary Club talk that I gave, I see some real business opportunities. So I don't come at this from just a pie in the sky point of view. This is stuff we can do. And that's why I did the Weathering the Storm guide. It's kind of a blueprint people can use to, look at this issue, because it's not easy. This is complex.
So you give us an idea of what your book is about and the why you did it. Now, and you obviously have done a lot of research on it. And again, the theme is trajectories, because, as the example we talked about off camera, was Social Security.
Right.
Another trajectory that people recognized 30 years ago, that something that wasn't going to be sustainable, keeping the retirement age at 62, and 65 for full benefits. And a Democratic Congress and a Republican President, Ronald Reagan, got together about 30 years ago and changed those things. At the time, it caused a lot of angst, and you would have thought the sky was falling. But as a result of a very slight change in some eligibility ages and payments and so forth, the trajectory of where we're at and potential red ink for the Social Security portion of our entitlement system, it has improved. It's still not the greatest, but it has improved as making some slight modifications. And so you've got 4 areas, and you mentioned the 4 E's. And I want to just touch on each briefly, and then focus a lot on that last one, that expectations and behavior. So first is energy. You said that this was the area that kind of kicked the whole thing off because you look at investment opportunities.
I did, yeah.
All right.
And here's the issue there. In spite of how the oil situation looks now, like all is going great and we've got this glut, that's very temporary. Oil is our Achilles heel, not just the United States, but the world. About 92% of our transportation systems run on oil. And oil isn't produced, it's extracted. That means it's got a finite quality to it. And we're all taken up on this shale oil revolution, this hype like, there's no tomorrow. I mean, we're in great shape with all this. We're really not.
Okay. And why is it that the shale oil is not necessarily a panacea?
Well, it's not because the geology of it is different. It's you're not digging into a pot of oil that is going to year in, year out produce. It's like giving a giant enema, if I can use that term, to a rock formation, and you're squeezing out by fracking, you're squeezing out this oil, and it's coming out in gushers. So they find that on frack wells, which is mainly shale oil, it probably has about a 2-year shelf life. After that, there's really not that much. The decline rates are as high as 40–50% a year. So it means you got to keep drilling and drilling and drilling.
You get half as much oil as you did the previous year.
Just to get, it's like a Ponzi scheme. So right now the trajectory is looking great, and there's no doubt it's made a difference. But I think most geologists would agree it's not a real long-term sustainable proposition. Now here's the problem. We focus on this hype and we think all is well, and we're not taking the actions we should take, looking at alternative energy systems and other ways of doing things. And the problem is it takes a long time to develop these structures and infrastructures to accommodate change. I loved your analogy, by the way, the Social Security thing, because I used to be a pilot, and so if I'm flying in a straight line toward you, but I'm running into a crosswind, my plane's going to veer off course. But if I correct it right away, it's not a problem. But if I let it go, it gets worse. And the whole perfect storm trajectory idea is these forces are growing exponentially. We think linearly.
Okay.
And so it's hard to imagine what can happen when they come together. And really, that's why I wrote the book, to say if these things all came together, this is what it could look like.
I remember taking an energy class with one of my majors was political science, and foreign policy and energy policy were 2 specific things that in the very early 80s were on the top of everyone's mind, because we had already gone through an oil shortage and so forth. And they were predicting that by the year 2000 or 2010 we were going to be running out of oil. Now, Part of that, as you said, we've had some new technologies in discovering more oil, but it's still a finite resource.
I don't think we're going to run out of oil,
Right.
but I think we're going to start running short of affordable oil.
Okay.
It's immensely expensive to go horizontal drilling and fracking, or to go 10,000 feet of water to find oil. The easy stuff is all gone. And right now, the oil crisis, if you want to call it that, oil at 65, 68 bucks a barrel, it's hard to frack a new well for that.
Okay.
And that's the dynamic. So you reach a point where oil gets so expensive, and it will, that whoa, that has an economic impact.
And part of the reason we've had some declining oil prices and so forth, we also have the folks in the Middle East not regulating the output like
That's
they
right.
did, creating those shortages back in the late 70s, early 80s when there was a lot of revolution going on in the Middle East. They've been just pumping it out at an ever-increasing rate, kind of wanting to reap the benefit of it now rather than worrying about rationing for the future.
You're absolutely right, Jamie. In fact, last Friday, OPEC met, and they decided they will not cut back on production. And so the oil on Monday dropped about $5 a barrel.
Well, when some people, for them, this is a national security issue because of our dependence and the fact that we still, even though domestic production is way up,
Right.
it's still, we rely a lot, very heavily on foreign oil. So does your
Absolutely.
book get into potential solutions for that? Or it's just in the awareness raising?
The oil part of it, it's more the awareness raising of it, but there are strategies. For instance, if I may use one example, right now with oil prices being what they are, China is stocking up their strategic petroleum reserve. They're buying everything on the spot market and filling it as fast as they can. We could be doing that, but instead, if you look at the behaviors, people are out buying SUVs, bigger vehicles. It's like we forgot what happened just a few years back.
So, okay, so that's energy. And we have people, though, like T. Boone Pickens, who is talking about converting, you know, our common carriers to compressed natural gas and not having them being oil dependent. That would be another way of changing that trajectory by changing our domestic uses.
Exactly. And we don't have to live in a cave to do all this. We don't have to go back to the horses. There are alternative systems. I could see us going to an electrical environment, using that as an energy source, a clean energy source you could use. And it would do a lot of the things we need to do.
Well, that's a great segue to the next E in your 4E equation, which is the environment.
Yes.
And so there's obviously interdependence with all of these energy and the environment. Then you get to the economy and the geopolitical, but I want to jump ahead. As far as the environment, you also believe that that's another ticking time bomb, that folks are still in the debate stage about you know, whether we need to do anything about it. And how does your book address that, or how does your website deal with that?
Well, on the book itself, I remember I put together, that's obviously a big part of the book, and I put together a number of scenarios. You know, this could happen. And I remember I ran it by Will Steger. I don't know if you know him. He's an explorer. And
He's been to the Antarctica
many times, yeah. And I said, Will, could this happen? And he goes, oh my God, yeah. And what I've really found is since I've written the book, it's happening faster than I thought.
And by it, you're referring to things like raising of the ocean temperature and the sea levels?
Right. And I think one of the things, you know, weather and climate aren't the same things, but if you look at the polar vortex, you look at the fact that you've got a warmer planet, even though we're not warm, the overall planet is, more moisture in the air because of it. So you take heat and moisture, and then you take a rising ocean level, and you take them together, and they start having a profound effect on weather patterns, arid in some areas, droughts in others, famines in others. And that's the way it is. So what it does on climate change is it exacerbates whatever the condition is. How many times have we read, this is a once in 100-year storm? My God, we've had a lot of them.
We've had 5 of those in the last...
Yeah. So, and this is kind of our new reality, but in some areas it's even worse. I was in China a year ago, and I was coughing the whole time. I needed a mask. It was just, the pollution aspects were so bad.
Yeah, that's one thing that we here in the Midwest don't experience very much.
don't.
And they already do in areas like Los Angeles, is smog, but it's even worse in these, what were thought of as third world countries, but they're starting to use the energies and not being worried about the impact on the environment. So I think was a former presidential candidate and current senator from Arizona, John McCain, who, when asked about this topic, said, yes, there's certainly some doubt, that we're not certain that this has to happen to our world, but he said, I'd rather be in a situation where we started to do something about it, just err on the side if it is something that's harmful to the planet.
Oh, yeah.
And this is, again, getting back to the changing trajectories.
If I might add, whenever I give talks, climate change is usually the one most contentious issue I run into.
Okay.
And metaphorically, I see it as like an individual like you or I having high blood pressure or diabetes. In the early stages, it's there. It's working on the organs and the cardiovascular system, pounding away. And the condition is worsening, but we, the patients, aren't really feeling it that much. So what's the imperative to act? Until it becomes a problem, and then you can reach that point of no return. The other thing I use, sticking with that metaphor, I said, if you went to the Mayo Clinic for something, a problem, and 97 out of 100 specialists said, this is what you've got. 2 of them said, well, we need more tests. 1 said, you don't have a problem. I think I know what you would do.
And so you're saying the analogy is to current scientists that there's about 97% that say that there is an issue.
Climate scientists.
Okay, climate scientists.
So if you're a scientist in biology or something else, you're not necessarily going to fit that profile.
Okay.
But the people that do this day in and day out for a living, all the national academies of sciences and all these big bodies, there's not much question in their mind about it.
And again, we're not talking about making changes that would throw us back to the Stone Age or anything like that.
No.
But, all right, now we're going to the third, because while some folks may say that applies to the left end of the political spectrum, your warnings about the economic and geopolitical tsunamis, I think, would be quite appealing to those people that view the world from the right side of the political spectrum, so to speak, the more conservative.
I would suspect so, and I guess you're just looking at well, first of all, globally, we're one big credit debt bubble. Not that far away from bursting. The 2008, global meltdown we had took a lot of effort on the parts of central banks. We put $4 trillion into our quantitative easing program, just as an example. And the other central banks did a lot of that. Well, right now, we're looking at a China that's contracting. They're not growing like they were. Japan is in recession, just got a Moody's downgrade the other day. Europe's not in good shape. Russia's in terrible shape. So you look at the global economy and you have issues. And then you come back to the United States, and we've had a good deal for a long time. The petrodollar currency is really backed by the dollar and has really given us an opportunity to have access to cheap capital, that sort of thing. But we've got a fiscal and monetary policy on steroids, and the chickens are coming home to roost.
And you're referring to both in the United States itself as having that fiscal policy that needs to be reformed, as well as global impact on the
partially, but the United States has particularly been aggressive on the monetary policy, pumping money into the system.
And you see that as a potential bad time bomb?
Well, I really do, Jamie, because at some point in time, how long can you carry debt? And the problem you have with that, if you keep printing money to do it, at some point in time, there's going to be some payback.
And so one of those potential solutions to this would be getting back to, more balanced budgets.
Exactly.
And a balanced budget amendment, again, going back to my college days when Ronald Reagan was first elected, and there was a lot of talk about whether that should pass. Couldn't get a majority of the people, let alone 2/3 of the states that are required to get a constitutional amendment for balanced budget, and it just kind of went away. And that was at a time when budget deficits annually were about $45 billion. I think that was the 45 or 48 billion was one of the biggest ones from the late 70s, from when Carter was president. And then the deficits just took off from there, and then it wasn't until the last 2 or 3 terms of Clinton's era with a Republican Congress where they got spending more under control, and revenues were exceeding spending for a couple years. And we were actually looking at the deficit being reduced, and now we've more than doubled it since then.
Oh, absolutely. For instance, 2009 and 10, we had about a $1.3 trillion deficit, and just to put that in perspective, we were borrowing about 39 cents on every dollar we spent.
Okay.
What bothers me, Jamie, and you kind of alluded to it earlier on Social Security, we've got 10,000 baby boomers a day are retiring. And as you know, on Social Security or Medicare, it's a pay-as-you-go thing. You know,
Right.
if you go to the Medicare lockbox, so to speak, you're going to find a bunch of IOUs. And we're actually paying out more money now on Social Security or parts of it, disability, we're taking in. And so we've got this big influx of boomers coming in. People are living longer, incurring heavier medical costs, and this is a tremendous burden. There's fewer and fewer active employees supporting more and more retired ones. And this is where you get into the American dream issue we talk about.
All right. And before we get to that last, so on the economic and geopolitical tsunamis, we had the finite struggle, the tug of war between finite resources and infinite demand. And then you've got the other things we haven't touched on, like cyber espionage and our outdated power grid and so forth. These are all things that are potential weaknesses that if we were hit with terrorists in those areas, that would be catastrophic.
Oh, absolutely. I put the economic, by the way, the broader titles, economic, geopolitical.
Right.
But there I get into the asymmetric threats where, and an asymmetric threat is something like cyber espionage. And right now they're very, very worried about, you know, you could plug into a utility or a bank or anything and you know, they're hacking it every day. I mean, not a month goes by we don't read about some new deal.
And to prevent that type of terrorism or to update our power grid takes money. So it's back into that whole cycle then.
Back to what you said about Social Security and the idea of starting something earlier on.
Right. And so you think that rather than talk about some reform that we could do a decade from now or longer, you think that reform needs to start now. It's similar to the reform we had 30 years ago to the Social Security system.
And I think in doing it, what we really have to look at is totality of the issue. What happens is we'll take little pieces of it. But it's like the medical saying, do no harm. Sometimes you can take that piece and harm 3 other areas. Everything is so interrelated, and that's the concept of the perfect storm.
Right. And all right, so then we have this expectations and behaviors, and you described it as mortgaging the American dream and its intergenerational consequences. Fill us in a little bit more. How do expectations and behaviors fit into all of this?
This is really the passion for me. I've got 2 grandkids, and I think of the world we're leaving them. And I want to tell you, I don't want to look back and say, you know, you had a chance to at least try to do something and you didn't. So we're leaving them a house of cards. The debt we've incurred. We've got, for instance, in the year 2020, the carrying charge on our debt will be something like $500 billion a year. That's about a fifth of our budget.
Right.
So that means there's less money available for other things, meaning them. And we're leaving them with this huge debt. We're consuming, squandering resources like there's no tomorrow. It's kind of a moral hazard attitude we have. The moral hazard one is of course, they use it, big banks have been attributed to that, but what it basically just means is you're doing all kinds of things thinking, well, there's not much of a consequence. But there is. The consequence is we're passing it on to our kids.
Well, we've gotten into a generational change, and I think that's this intergenerational consequences you talked about. My grandparents, you know, who grew up during the Depression, they didn't expect to have a whole lot, and but we had the advent of post-World War II, and then the expansion of credit and easy credit, and buying houses with nothing down, and we see how that all, you're saying that tends to impact then all these other variables as well.
Sure, well, one way it does, 3 of them, 3 dream enablers: cheap energy, abundant resources, and unlimited opportunity. Well, the energy isn't going to be cheap much longer. In fact, it's not now. Remember when gas was under $1 a gallon or 50 cents a gallon?
We've seen it spike where oil was over $100 a barrel.
Exactly.
And gasoline was over $4. Now we're coming back down to $2.75, but it goes back to that mentality. Well, then if gas is cheap, well, then I'll go ahead and go on that long trip, or I'll buy that SUV.
And that's the thing. If you don't feel the direct consequences, and we're short-term thinkers in America, I think, and we're not looking at the long term, but
isn't it true that it would be, but part of it is that avoidance of pain. People don't want to have yes, we need to do something, but let's do it tomorrow. Don't affect my party today. Let's go ahead and spend more than we make, and not and not impact that. I don't want to have the pain of having to bring my spending under control, or going without my third car, or the fourth TV set that I have in the house, or whatever it might be. People don't want to have to change their habits. But you're saying we're not talking about going back to horse and buggy days necessarily.
Oh, no, nothing like that. This is very gradual. In fact, if you look at the millennials now, they're the first generation that doesn't expect to live better than their parents. You and I did. I grew up thinking, yeah, I'll live better. That's happening, and they're seeing this debt. They're leaving college with what? The average loan is what, 27 grand now or something?
Well, that's probably on the low side. And if you want a professional degree, it's 6 digits.
Oh yeah, for a law degree or medical or anything, it gets to be in the 200,000 range, or it could be. And so the fact of the matter is the millennials now aren't buying the houses. They don't have the cash flow to do it. And I think they've pretty well taken an attitude, well, I might as well spend what I have,
And then that has all the impact on these other areas in the economy, such as real estate. If we don't have people that will buy the houses, then the values go down. And when the values go down, then the mill rates for governments and governmental entities have to go up to provide the same services that people expect to have.
Exactly. It's like that mouse, running in the cage. You keep going faster and faster just to try to make ends meet, and it's hard.
Okay, so I think that we've covered the 4 areas, and the fact that there is something to be done. So you talked about there being opportunities. So at this point, what can the average person do about this?
Well, I can tell you the way I look at it, and I think I'm a pretty average person, when I look at it. But if I look at energy, to me, it's right-sizing the energy patterns. If I can give you an example, and it gets at the environment too. I used to be a pilot. I flew my own plane, and I burned about 1,500 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel each year. That in turn put 30,000 pounds of CO2 into the air.
Okay.
Just for frivolous thing. It wasn't because I needed to do it. And I had a car that was rather a gas guzzler premium. And when I got religion on this, I went to Priuses. And I've got a smaller energy pattern now, and because of it, I've got a smaller carbon footprint, and I'm saving money. And I'm not living in a cave. I'm doing everything I used to do. I'm not flying anymore, but.
Do you see some of this happening, though? You talk about reducing carbon footprint. Also includes reducing the footprint of houses. The size of houses we've seen average square foot of the new construction going down. That's meeting more of the reality, I suppose, of cost and other things.
Oh, absolutely. And the other encouraging thing I see is in buildings, LEED certified buildings now that, reduce the carbon footprint and make energy more efficient and that sort of thing. That's getting to be a big deal. And if you're in that kind of a business and you have a LEED certified building, you're probably going to find more tenants because they know their energy costs are going to be lower.
Do you find that these issues, the way that they're interconnected, and the fact that you're not coming at this from one end of the political spectrum, people viewing this may say, well, depending on what they want, here they either call you too conservative when you talk about needing to balance the budget and getting spending under control and so forth, and then there'll be others that'll say, oh, he must be a liberal if he's talking about environment. You think that this is an apolitical situation, that's just reality of the situation?
It really is. It transcends the policies, left, right, the whole thing, because we're a planetary system, and it is a system. It affects us all. I'll give you one example, just messaging. I've found when I talk to business groups, people that are dollar and cents people, and that's it. If I come at them with climate change and say this is to save polar bears, it's not that they don't like polar bears, but if I say if you do this, it's cost effective and it's a good way to get market share, it's a whole different ballgame. The point I'm making is it's good for the polar bears and it's good for the CFO.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And then your other opportunity here is recalibrate thinking. Why don't you expand on that?
Well, this gets back to, we grew up in a time, especially the Gen Xers and Yers and millennials, where we kind of had everything. When you go back to your grandparents, their expectation was we pay as you go.
Right.
My mother, for instance, she'd turn off lights, she balanced it, and she used to mark down the number of gallons, that we used in the car and everything else. And I'm not saying we have to get back to that, but we've got a throwaway culture. And it's, we're going to have to do more reusing, recycling, right sizing, and knowing and doing it, we're not going to compromise our lifestyle. I mean, it's still.
And these suggestions would be on the weathering the storm.
That's in weathering
website.
the storm. The lethal trajectories will give you more of a global point of view. But I should say in lethal trajectories too, what I tried to show. One of the characters in the book is a pastor who lives in a small town that's really hurting because of this perfect storm. And it talks about how they deal with it. And they get into different types of groups. They organize, they pool resources. They do a lot of things we can do. And we're resilient people. There's a lot we can do. But I think sometimes our politicians don't want to be on that bleeding edge. You don't want to upset the electorate.
Well, you're not. So you're not to the point of being a fatalist, saying that the die is cast. It's too late to do anything about whether it's climate change or recalibrating our spending habits in the economy. You're not one of these doomsday survivalists who say just get your guns and your generators and go out and be self-reliant or whatever.
Absolutely not. And to get back to my Churchill quote, there's a lot of opportunities in these difficulties. And it gets back to what you were talking about earlier, Reagan and Tip O'Neill. They started working on a problem that could have snowballed, but they addressed it early. And all I'm saying is, let's just use a little common sense.
Well, I recall when they did that, when they raised the age for full retirement and withheld or just extended when full benefits are extended. They admitted that this is not a permanent solution, that this is going to have to be revisited probably in 20 years or less. Mm-hmm. And now it's been 30 plus years, and nothing more has done on the Social Security issue. Or on Medicare, for instance. If anything, we've expanded the areas where Medicare is paid, and now we've got the Affordable Care Act, so we've even increased even more the burden on public health and so forth. So your advice would be, let's, before we go expanding the size of government, look at the cost benefit first.
Look at the cost benefit, but really look inside your own self. Look at your family. What can you do to lower your carbon footprint, to use less energy? And one of the things I recommend to people is don't start from scratch. Leverage your efforts. There's all kinds of good organizations. On my website, for instance, I do have a number of organizations people can go to. And you can work with others, and you can learn from them. You can form critical mass, and you can, in fact, influence public opinion on this. But we need to do it. Here's the problem I think we really have. We're hardwired to think in short time frames. Business, they look at quarterly earnings, the politician, the next election. And to really address the issues of the perfect storm, we're going to have to take a little longer view of this.
So it's not just what our government can do to change these trajectories, but you're talking about individuals, whether it's reducing the carbon footprint, which you've mentioned a couple of times, but it's also repositioning our personal finances,
right,
not being as far in debt, which I think also has been a product of this last recession. People realized it's not good to have overextended credit card debt and so forth, and we've seen the average debt per person actually go down since our last recession, which again is not necessarily a bad thing, and you see it as a good thing that shouldn't be short-lived. People shouldn't go back to their spending habits from before.
And then you can make the case, well, gee, if they're not spending, we're a 70% consumer-based economy, what happens? And so I'm not saying everybody goes cold turkey tomorrow.
Right.
But I think we all have to look at our own households and look at the debt we're carrying, and it's
living within our means.
Living more within our means, right.
All right, so we've got the awakening to the threat and just being willing to engage to address it. That's what we also need, is a non-emotional discussion of many of these topics that people see as highly political or highly partisan, I guess.
And that's absolutely right, and I would hope that in doing it, people could see a message of hope.
Okay.
And let me give you one example, if I may. Pearl Harbor. If somebody would have said to you on December 6, 1941, that within 3 years we'll have transformed from a peacetime to a wartime economy, we'll have trained and put in uniform 15 million people, become the arsenal of democracy, invented nuclear energy, and still had enough juice left to finance the Marshall Plan, you would have said, come on. But that's what we can do if we get behind something. But we've got to know that there's an imperative to do it.
Right.
Or otherwise, it's like you said, Jamie, we don't want to feel the pain.
Yes. Well, I think that we're to the end of our time together, but I want you to give that website one more time, please.
www.weatheringthestorm, all one word, .net. And if you go to that, you can buy the book that way. My website is free, by the way, and you get the newsletters, the news flashes. I write regular blogs on issues. For instance, I just wrote about Xi Jinping in China and President Obama cutting the climate change deal that they did.
Okay.
And so I try to be contemporary on that. I do the best practices of organizations that are really doing a good job on this, because there are a lot of folks doing some good work. Then I put out a quarterly newsletter that's a little bit more in depth, and all that is free. The book itself, you can order it online, or if you want to go to Amazon, get an ebook version or whatever, you can do that too.
All right. And again, that book is Lethal Trajectories
Right.
by Michael Conley.
And if I may,
All right, sure.
yeah, the Weathering the Storm,
Okay.
you can download that for free. Just go into my website and
Okay.
you can download the version of it.
The contents of this are just free on.
Right, that's free. But I wanted something to go with the book, so.
So it wasn't just all doom and gloom.
No,
or
no,
whatever.
that's the lethal trajectories will wake you up to it. The Weathering the Storm will start saying, here's some of the things you can do.
All right.
But I'm definitely not a gloom and doom guy.
All right, very good. Well, Mike, I appreciate your time and coming over to Hudson to talk about this and get this word out. Again, this is just kind of a passion of yours because you have grandchildren and you're worried about the future generations.
That's absolutely right.
All right. Well, I have children, no grandchildren yet, but I am also in that camp of wondering what we're going to do and what can we do,
Right.
And looking at it from a positive, proactive standpoint rather than worrying about it being too late sometime in the future.
And a lot of good stuff can come from it.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you, Mike,
Thank
for
you
coming
so
on
much.
the show.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. And thank our viewers for your time and watching us. And remember that that's Weathering the Storm, all one word, no hyphens, .net. And with that, I want to thank you again. And again, let our audience know we would love to hear ideas, whether it's authors or subjects that you would like to see discussed on the show. Thank you for watching Western Wisconsin Journal.